Today, I decided to answer one of the dumbest questions I've ever had while opening Roblox. What would happen if I joined a random roleplay server pretending to be the richest girl anyone had ever seen? Not rich in a believable way either. I'm talking the kind of rich where your avatar looks like every limited item in existence exploded onto one character. Sparkles everywhere, expensive accessories, dramatic animations, and enough confidence to make everyone think I owned half the platform. The plan sounded simple. Join the server, say almost nothing, and watch people make their own assumptions. I wasn't going to tell anyone I was famous. I wasn't going to tell anyone I owned millions of Robux. And I definitely wasn't going to tell anyone I was looking for attention. I was simply going to exist. If people wanted to create their own story, I was more than happy to let them. So I loaded into the game, took exactly 3 steps away from spawn, and before I even had time to rotate my camera, someone typed, "OMG, are you rich?" That's when I knew we were already heading into dangerous territory. I replied with the most mysterious answer possible. I guess. That's it. 2 words. I didn't flex. I didn't brag. I didn't even mention Robux. Somehow those 2 words caused half the server to lose their minds. One player walked up and said they loved my outfit. Another asked where I got my accessories. A third asked if I wanted a tour of the city. Meanwhile, someone else was already telling everyone they recognized me from another game. They absolutely did not. I had created this account about 15 minutes earlier. Somehow the rumor train had already left the station without me. Within 5 minutes, I had 3 people following me everywhere I went. I couldn't even walk into the grocery store roleplay building without someone opening every door for me like I was royalty. Then the first competitor arrived. A guy wearing sunglasses indoors walked over and said, "Don't listen to them. I'll show you around." Another guy immediately interrupted him and said, "No, she's with me." Excuse me? I had spoken maybe 4 sentences this entire time, and somehow I had become the center of an argument I didn't even know I was participating in. I stood there watching them debate over who deserved to give me a virtual tour of a map everyone had probably memorized years ago. One of them started listing everything he owned. "I have a mansion." The other answered, "I have 2. The first responded, "I have 3 cars." The second replied, "Mine are faster." They had somehow turned a conversation about directions into an unofficial wealth competition. Meanwhile, I was standing there wondering if either of them realized none of these buildings were real. Things escalated when another player walked over carrying a virtual bouquet of flowers. He handed them to me and typed, "These are for you." Before I could even respond, the other guy typed, "She's allergic." Allergic to digital flowers? Since when? Apparently the server accepted this explanation because nobody questioned it. Instead, the flower guy got offended and accused the other player of lying. Suddenly they were arguing over whether my imaginary allergies were real. I hadn't even invented the allergy. They did that themselves. At this point I realized the less I talked, the crazier everything became. So I committed to the bit. Every response became short and mysterious. Maybe. Interesting. We'll see. Apparently speaking like an NPC increases your popularity because everyone started trying even harder to impress me. One player offered me a mansion. Another offered me a sports car. A third offered me an entire business. I accepted none of them because I wanted to see how far this would go. Then someone shouted in chat, "She's looking for a boyfriend." I have absolutely no idea where that information came from. I never said it. Nobody asked me. Someone simply manufactured an entire headline out of thin air. Within seconds, every guy in the server transformed into contestants on the world's most chaotic dating show. One changed into a tuxedo. Another equipped a pet dragon. Someone else started throwing money animations everywhere. A different player kept repeatedly saying he respected women every 30 seconds like he was reading from a script. The funniest part was how every single conversation slowly became a competition. If one guy complimented my avatar, another complimented it harder. If someone offered me a house, another offered me an island. One guy even claimed his dad owned Roblox. Sure he did. And my pet toaster is secretly the CEO of the moon. I decided to make things even worse. I walked over to the smallest starter house on the map, looked at it for a second, and typed, "Cute." That single word somehow convinced everyone I was shopping for real estate. Suddenly people started advertising their houses like they were real estate agents. Mine has 6 bedrooms. Mine has a pool. Mine has better furniture. Mine has security. Security from what? The neighborhood squirrels? They were treating this roleplay server like a $1 million property market. Eventually, one of the guys challenged another to a race to prove who deserved my attention. They both sprinted across the map while I casually walked in the opposite direction. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy trying to beat each other. When they came back, exhausted from pressing the W key, they couldn't even remember where I had gone. I was sitting peacefully inside a cafe eating virtual cake. Then, another player joined the server and immediately asked why everyone was crowding around me. Before I could answer, somebody else explained that I was the richest girl in Roblox. The rumor had evolved again. Earlier I was rich. Now I apparently owned the entire economy. At this rate, another hour, and they were going to say I personally invented Robux. The new player instantly joined the competition. He pulled out every rare pet he had and surrounded me with them. I complimented one of the pets because it looked cool. Huge mistake. The other players thought I'd chosen a favorite. The chat exploded. "That's unfair. He's paid to win. She only likes rich people." Meanwhile, I was over here admiring a pixelated dog. Somehow that became breaking news. Then the funniest moment of the entire experiment happened. One guy whispered to me asking if I wanted him to get rid of the competition. I asked what he meant. He said, "Watch this." He walked over to another player and challenged him to a boxing match. They spent the next several minutes throwing virtual punches at each other while dramatically typing things like, "Take this," and "You'll never win." I wasn't even watching anymore. I had wandered into a clothing store looking at hats. They were fighting over someone who had already left the scene. Eventually, one of them came running back, proudly announcing he had won. "Congratulations. Your prize is absolutely nothing," because I was currently trying on sunglasses. Somehow that didn't stop him from celebrating. By now the server had completely divided itself into teams. Some players thought I was genuinely rich. Others believed I was secretly recording a video. A few thought I worked for Roblox. One person insisted I was a developer testing the game. The theories became more entertaining than the actual roleplay. Nobody considered the possibility that I was simply a random person wearing expensive accessories. That's the internet in a nutshell. The simplest explanation almost never wins. Then someone finally asked the question I'd been expecting all day. "How much Robux do you have?" I answered with, "Enough." Instantly, everyone interpreted that differently. One guessed 50,000, another guessed 1,000,000. Someone else guessed infinity. Infinity Robux would probably cause several economic disasters, but apparently nobody cared about the details. They simply accepted the myth and kept building onto it. One player started following every command I gave, even though I wasn't giving commands. I said, "I'm going to the park." 5 people followed me. I sat on a bench. They all sat on nearby benches. I stood up. They stood up. I felt like I had accidentally started a tiny virtual cult. At this point, I wanted to see if anyone would finally question the entire situation. So I purposely walked into a fountain and got stuck for a minute. Nobody laughed. Instead, they all rushed over trying to rescue me from approximately 6 inches of animated water. That's dedication. Then the argument started again. One guy insisted he should be the one helping me. Another said he got there first. A third claimed he had been loyal since I joined. They were now debating rescue rights for someone who wasn't even in danger. Eventually, I climbed out myself while everyone continued arguing. Nobody acknowledged the fact that the problem had already been solved. It was like watching people continue playing a football game after the stadium lights had turned off. Then another player walked up and typed something that completely changed the mood. She's probably pretending. Finally, somebody used critical thinking. For about 3 glorious seconds, everyone went silent. Then another player defended me by saying, "Rich people don't have to prove they're rich." Somehow the suspicion disappeared immediately. I didn't even need to say anything. The crowd handled the debate for me. At this point, I realized confidence beats evidence, surprisingly often in online games. If enough people believe something, others simply go along with it. Since nobody wanted to ruin the fantasy, they collectively decided I was telling the truth, despite the fact that I had never actually claimed anything. The server kept inventing new stories. Someone claimed I gave away thousands of Robux every week. Someone else claimed I owned multiple groups. Another insisted I had famous friends. None of those statements came from me. They were building an entire cinematic universe around a character whose biggest accomplishment today was standing still. Then came the final showdown. 2 of the most determined players challenged each other to one last competition. The winner would supposedly earn the right to be my friend. They agreed to settle everything with an obstacle course. I wished them both good luck, because honestly, they seemed invested. Off they went, jumping across platforms, climbing ladders, and dramatically announcing every checkpoint they reached. While they were busy competing, I quietly walked back to spawn. I opened the menu, prepared to leave, and before disconnecting, I typed one final message. By the way, I was pretending. Silence. Complete silence. Then the chat exploded harder than it had all day. Half the players thought I was joking. Others accused me of lying about lying. One person refused to believe it because my outfit was still expensive. Another congratulated me for the prank. The 2 guys who had spent the last several minutes competing immediately stopped arguing and started asking if the whole thing had been fake from the beginning. Yes. Every second of it. I never promised anyone anything. I never claimed to own endless Robux. I simply let assumptions grow until they became impossible to control. Watching the reactions was easily the funniest part, because some people laughed at themselves while others desperately tried to rewrite history. A few claimed they knew all along, even though they had been defending me 5 minutes earlier. One player simply typed, "Worth it," which honestly might have been the best response in the entire server. I left the game laughing because the experiment answered the original question perfectly. Pretending to be a rich girl didn't make people fight because of money. They fought because they convinced themselves there was something valuable to win. The funniest part was that nothing special ever existed. The story grew one assumption at a time until the server turned a random stranger into a celebrity, a millionaire, and the center of a competition nobody needed to enter. Sometimes all it takes is one mysterious answer, a confident avatar, and a group of people willing to fill in the blanks themselves. Roblox never disappoints when it comes to creating chaos out of absolutely nothing, and somehow I managed to start an entire rivalry without lifting a finger. I walked in as a random player, I walked out with half the server arguing over a made-up version of me. And honestly, I don't think any scripted event could have been funnier than watching people invent a legend from thin air.